Think of the most successful people you know. All those people probably share one thing: character. My guest today posits that character will define how successful anyone can be it in leading people, working in business, and managing others. In his book, Character, The Ultimate Success Factor, Dr. J. Phillip London says that character is, quote, a complex aggregate of mental and ethical traits that form the nature of a person, and that character is the most important determinant for an individual's success. Dr. London is the executive chairman and chairman of the board of CACI International, an information solutions and services firm. GovExec readers will recognize CACI from the government contracts it holds. Dr. London is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy and the Naval Postgraduate School. He also holds a doctorate from the George Washington University. Character, The Ultimate Success Factor, is Dr. London's third book. In it, he discusses the concept of character-based leadership, how to identify character as an important factor of success, and the ways to live and lead more effectively through one's character. Dr. London, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a delight to be here, certainly, and to speak about one of our interesting topics these days, character.
Oh, absolutely. So what are the key traits that make up character, and how do those traits contribute to successful leadership of large-scale organizations?
The notion of character is some ways a little bit sophisticated, but certainly you're thinking about one's ethical perspective, the notion of values, what your beliefs are, how you approach your decisions, and how you carry on your life. Certainly from the orientation of doing the right thing. Those are pretty much the notions of character, including accountability.
Well, how does character work in groups in that sense? Does character rub off onto individuals if you're a leader, that kind of thing in an organizational situation?
Character in groups is one of the most important attributes that an organization can have, the character of the organization. It is, I think, a function of leadership and the leaders and the leaders in the organization, but it also is a representation of the individual beliefs and values and character. A character of organization can be created through its culture and through the individuals that lead the organization. But what you're really after in organizational character and ethics is an institutional view of the importance of that, where in some ways it becomes a little bit independent of the leader. The United States Marine Corps is a perfect example of an organization that has its own values and character that certainly are reinforced by its leadership, but I think you'd find is sustained by the institution and its members over the decades and even centuries.
Did you have the same experience in the Navy as well?
Similar. I think I pointed out the Marine Corps because it is truly, I think, a fine example of how that's that. By the way, there's something I'd like to say right off the bat. When we speak of character and having good character and an organizational character, it doesn't mean that everyone in the operation is perfect. We're not talking about perfection here.
Of course. We're
talking about intentions and views and what we try to accomplish and endeavoring to do the right thing. So it's also has the idea of a spirit. The spirit of a good character is important to relate in this context as well. But the leadership can be role models, and I think it's very important to reflect on the good character of role models and their influence over an organization and those that their subordinates or those on the team as well. So you have both of these things working. You have the institutional cultural perspective once it's created and established, and then you have the continuing value of role models and the leadership role.
How do you think a leader with character would impart that culture and impart that character onto the rest of the organization's subordinates, that kind of thing?
Well, there's nothing that beats leading by example. If you have to be willing to and believe, really. This is a belief system in many ways, a viewpoint that is part of your personality, and I think that is can be conveyed to others through mostly this role model idea that I keep focusing on, because that's what people see, that's what people observe, and you're really also setting a standard and expectations, right, which is very important. Is to be able to create those expectations that not only are you going to perform in a manner that represents doing the right thing, but you expect all of your organization and your teammates to do that. And you can communicate that through many ways. First is your behaviors, I mentioned. Other is written documents, presentations, awards, and recognition for good performance in the organization. There's a number of ways to manifest that as you go along, which is very important, by the way, to be able to measure, in a sense, the level of appreciation and for the degree to which your values have been incorporated and become a part of the body of the organization.
Of course. In your experience, what are some of those examples of leadership that is role modeled or communicated?
I thought a lot about this idea. There are many, many examples that pick out through America's history. Certainly Abraham Lincoln was a man of incredible character and tenacity, but I really like to emphasize the father of our country, George Washington. I mean this in the most serious way, as a perfect example of value of character. Doesn't mean Washington was perfect. We're not talking about perfection. We're not talking about holier than thou or self-righteousness. We're talking about a spirit and intent to do what they believed was right and to live up to their own self-standards. Certainly Washington's role in leading the American Revolution, the military side would not have been a success without him. Another thing is his role in his character in leadership in the Continental Congress, and then his leadership role in the presidency, refusing titles, refusing to be called the king, recommending being called Mr. President as opposed to some other exalted title. So those are just examples of how he demonstrated character that really has formed a lot of the basis of the legacy and history and the way how our country's evolved. So I like to refer back to him as one of the primary examples. But there are others. Harry Truman was faced with incredible decision with regard to the atomic weapons. That decision process, which called for the death of many people, but was a saving in so many ways for those that would have been engaged in the battle. So that the character of trying to do what was best in terribly complicated situation.
Right. You mentioned some presidents there, and in the book you talk about politically, or in the beginning of the book you mentioned politically oriented people and mission oriented people. Obviously, in political organizations, government organizations, sometimes those things are at odds. What's the difference between those two things?
I've sort of bifurcated something that really isn't possible to bifurcate. It's an enormous range of shades of gray. But I like to think of people, and I pretty well can identify folks that think in terms of the mission they're on, the project they're engaged in, the contract they're working, their function in the organization, and they tend to subordinate their own self-interests. Politically oriented people tend to be more or less the other way. They tend to see things as a politically driven situation, more what is in it for them or what's in it for their team, as opposed to getting the job done in the broader sense.
You say the four intangibles of leadership are integrity, courage, and conviction, commitment, and vision. So let's boil down a little bit to courage and conviction in regards to something like Harry Truman's decision to drop the bomb on Japan. And in your own experience, you mentioned in 2004, CACI was involved in a $415 million deal with Defense and Intelligence Group. You were basically saying that you had a lot of voices telling you that it was not the way to go, or maybe was too risky, but you cited the third intangible about courage and conviction as the reason you were able to make it. Can you explain how your character made you eschew all these sort of voices and how it changed the game for CACI?
I think that you develop a sixth sense about certain things, and as you go along in life, that sixth sense becomes more finely honed. I'm in my 43rd year at CACI, so I think I've developed a bit of a perspective of what makes things work in this industry, in this market. You come to a point where you have to make decisions, and sometimes you get conflicting advice. I go through a process of making sure that I've got strong input from people. And then I evaluate and sort the perspectives, and I reflect on what I believe will work. So at some point, it's almost a sixth sense. You say, okay, I've heard the arguments pro and con. They're rendered in good faith, conscientious people, competent people, and then you've got to make that decision and go forward. That's part of the accountability issue that is associated with character that we talked about before. And I think that was one of the things that President Harry Truman had to grapple with, was the pro and con aspect of the implications, the horrendous implications. There are no comparison between buying a small company and the things that the President of the United States had to cope with at that time. But in some ways, it's the same process. Process, I think, is analogous, if not the same.
So you talked about decision making just now. Everyone's human, so what happens? I mean, you also talk about accountability. What happens when someone, especially someone in a leadership role, may make a decision that doesn't turn out the way that was anticipated? How does a character-based leader? What would a character-based leader do after that?
I want to draw a distinction here, Ross, and that is we're not talking about perfection when we talk about character in the first place, and we're not talking about perfection when we talk about decision making. When I talk about character-based success, I'm talking about an individual being able to believe that they had done the right thing, that they'd given their best effort, that they had appreciated the support and assistance of those that had been on their team, and they'd look in the mirror and said, I gave it my best shot. When I talk about success, I'm not talking about how wealthy you become or how famous, or I'm talking about the personality, the personal aspect of success. In many ways, I believe is something that's a bit missing in our society and culture today.
How so?
It seems like every time you pick up a paper or hit a blog or whatever, there's some new scandal or some new problem. Certainly this last decade, we had all kinds of issues in the commercial side, in government, in the military. Just a year ago, I remember seeing the Joint Chiefs testifying in Congress about the sexual abuse issues in the military and how tragic and sad that was. And I just lamented the fact that these fine people of good faith and good intentions, and I know several of them, and I'm thinking how sad it is that we have this status and this condition.
What do you think is causing the erosion of character?
That is an important question. I don't think I could put my finger on it precisely, but it has to be standards in our society, and I'm not sure whether that's a leadership issue or not. I do believe, for example, that what the Department of Defense, let's focus on that for a second, is going through right now, with its efforts to take a careful look at some of these things and what the Secretary has put in place are the right things. Focusing and making it an important issue, integrity, ethics, the notion of character, accountability, morals, values, has got to be a reinforcing thing for our culture and our society, as well as the Department of Defense. The other way to look at this, however, is that the members of the military, the members of our government, the members of our industry that I'm in, come from all walks of life in American society. So in some ways, it's a reflection and mirror of who we are. One can focus on trying to raise the standards, raise the bar in these institutions. That's certainly what we've tried to do at CACI over many decades. In fact, I've been working and focusing on this topic of character and ethics and culture for decades. And I've seen the importance of it in terms of being able to fulfill your expectations. We have a fairly large company. We deal with a lot of the taxpayers' money, and we have our clients have expectations of our performance and our dependability and reliability and accountability. And that's a big deal for me. So we have reinforced the idea of the culture side. That doesn't mean that we're perfect. We have people that go off the ranch once in a while. Unfortunately, we have to pull them back. People break the law. They go off the ranch, yeah. But it doesn't mean that the organization, it doesn't mean that it isn't important for the operation and the organization to have standards, high standards, in terms of these character notions we've been talking about.
I want to thank our guest, Dr. J. Phillip London. You can find Dr. London's book, Character, the Ultimate Success Factor, at bookstores everywhere. Thanks for listening to the Excellence in Government podcast. Check us out on Twitter at GovExec or on the web at govexec.com. To subscribe, search iTunes or Stitcher for GovExec. My name is Ross John Fortuny, and this has been the Excellence in Government podcast.